Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hello, Nathan, and how are you? And I'm good. It's great to see you, my dear friend. Great to see you.
Definitely. Well, it's been a while since we last spoke, so I think we need to have a dialogue.
We certainly do.
Well, since we last spoke, there's been a lot of things happening in the UK.
Yeah.
We've had the anti-Semitism in the UK just increasing like never before, and we've spoke about that before. But before we discuss it, I just want to play a brief clip. We'll play about a minute and a half, and it's in reference to the two Jewish blokes who were stabbed in Golders Green. Now, there was another gentleman stabbed prior to that, but we will discuss the two Jewish gentlemen. And this is a rabbi who, when he came to hear about what happened, he was actually in Auschwitz with some students.
Joined now by Rabbi Doron Birnbaum. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Firstly, we'll get on to the Prime Minister and his visit here this afternoon. But I just want to ask you about when you first heard about this attack that took place yesterday. Where were you?
Sure, Will. I mean, I've just come back as a rabbi and educator. It has been in high school, one of the big schools in the Jewish community. For the last 4 days, with 90 Jewish students in Poland, in places like Tarnów and Krakow, where you'd have a bustling Jewish community like what you can see around Golders Green. There is nothing left anymore. We visited mass graves of children, we visited camps in Majdanek, and yesterday, as we were in Auschwitz, the largest Jewish cemetery in the world, where 1.3 million of our brothers and sisters were murdered, I was in a barrack called the latrines. It's where they used to supposedly allow the Jewish women to go to the toilet, if ever allowed. My phone pings, and I get a message that 2 Jewish people have been stabbed in Golders Green minutes from my home. And out of respect, I step outside the barracks, and I'm in Auschwitz, and I want people to understand this, because sometimes in numbers we miss the personal narrative. Everyone's got a family WhatsApp group. As a Jew, I go onto my family WhatsApp group, and I ask, are you okay? Are my family still alive? I get pictures and videos from the community. I zoom in at the bodies, the legs, the clothes that can be seen, to try and identify is that my own family. And every single Jew in our community did that yesterday. I then have to take a group of 40 teenagers in Auschwitz, outside the gas chambers, and sit them down, explain to them what's happened in their community, and say, you might need to check on your parents just to see if they're okay. And people need to see the connection between these two things. There are Jewish communities that have been decimated and don't exist anymore. And one day, in 80 years' time, am I or my children going to take our grandchildren down the streets of Golders Green, Hendon, Edgware, Stamford Hill, any Jewish community in the UK, and they're going to say, look at that marking on the wall. There was once a Jew here.
I mean, the interview goes on, but I think that conveys the severity and how it must felt, how it must feel for that gentleman and those in the community in Golders Green to go through what they went through. I don't know what you want to say, Mark.
I had caught this earlier. I couldn't hear the sound through there. That's just one of those things. It's partly the technology, but it's not a lot. I mean, both you and I have been to Auschwitz at different times. I mean, I was there in 1986, many years ago. You were recently there as well, and you've been there twice. I'm trying to think of the right word, because irony is not the right word, but you understand what I mean, where the fact that this dear rabbi is there with a group of young people, young Jewish people, to be there in Auschwitz. And if I've got my facts right, and then this appalling incident then plays out on the streets of London while he is there. And frankly, it's not surprising that people are heckling the Prime Minister, etc., of the UK, Sir Keir Starmer, and others. Why should they be surprised? So let's just relate this to what had happened on Bondi Beach in Australia, where 14 to 15 days before that, the government was being warned about that they would see the awful incident that unfortunately unfolded on Bondi Beach. That also other people within the UK, within the Jewish community, have been warning the government about this. We've had that awful incident as well, where the ambulances were burnt. You and I have made a comment on an appalling situation where a Jewish man is going about his business, I think either property inspector, something like that, but because he then to someone is looking outwardly Jewish, why can't he? And then some guy gets off his bike and gives him a load of verbal abuse. I think that gentleman has now been arrested. I think I'm just saying this calmly, that every week we are seeing this disgusting behavior. And also with the recent council elections, and we've had people, where they're going around canvassing, they've had to look at the inverted commas Green Party come Islamist party, let's just say it how it is, the comments that they are making and the comments that people have made that are profoundly anti-Semitic, in my humble opinion. And then basically they've been knocking on doors. You and I have commented on this in previous shows in regard to, I believe, Sheffield, in regard to what was happening in Brighton. And we need to come back to that. And we need to come back to Zach Balansky, and accused of saying things after the arrest of this man, this Somalian, I believe, refugee, come over to this country who thinks it's perfectly acceptable to stab Jewish people on the streets of the UK. It is not. So we saw these people knocking on doors, going, basically asking you, do you buy Israeli goods? Could you then stop buying Israeli goods, and the whole BDS? So outrageous. And then knocking on people's doors that have been opened, and some of the people behind those doors are Jewish.
Yes.
I'm saying it in measured terms, not for effect, because at times I'm trying to find the right words. But honestly, I'm just disgusted beyond measure about this and what is happening with our own country. And then if you've had, and I'll say it how it is, if you've had from the river to the sea cult shouting, but from day one, we have to go back to October the 7th. 2023, and we remember the fact that there was suddenly this protest outside the Israeli embassy in the UK calling for restraint. Now, before anyone, we're looking at we're coming up to 3 years in October since those appalling events. I was in Israel twice last year. You were in there once with me in May, and I've been down to the Nova Festival. We've talked about this. Then up north on the Lebanon border, but going down south again to the Nova Festival, to Kibbutzim near Oz, stood outside the Beavis family home. Words fail me. And the problem is, as you know, within the media cycle, it's within this box, it's instant, the cycle moves on so quickly without actually being able to examine what's happened. And we'll go on to discuss this. Let's just point this out. The appalling violence against Israeli women in that attack, and the 251 hostages taken into Gaza, the way the women were treated, raped and attacked, even if the United Nations wants to deny that. And it took some very, very brave Israeli women to go in there and to say, You know, we need to talk about this. And of course, they raised that, wouldn't they? You know, me too, except if you're a Jew. Now, that's why we are remembering all of these events where the news cycle says, oh, let's move on. We move, and then they start accusing. There is a reason I'm saying this. Then they start going on about genocide. There is no genocide. Then all their discussions in regard to the military actions that America and Israel took against Iran, and then trying to remember all that history. I talk about that. You talk about that. And then we're dealing with young people that don't know their facts. But coming back to this, the fact that this rabbi was in Auschwitz with all the appalling history of that you and I again have discussed. In a meeting where we're looking at IG Farben, we're looking at the chemical conglomerate of IG Farben, and then creating Cyclone B gas, and then think it's perfectly acceptable to create concrete cells and then chuck it through caps at the top, and then murder people and murder Jewish people, and then put them in ovens and burn the body. I'm not saying this just for effect. This is the fact. And then suddenly we are seeing this rise of violence. We are seeing that people feel it's perfectly acceptable to do Nazi salutes on the streets of our country and elsewhere, to walk around with terrorist flags. And let's just say this, right? Again, I know it's Australia, but there is a reason. So it's been reported that ISIS brides, I think 4, have been returned to Australia. And also in a discussion, that maybe 2 of those will immediately be arrested under the Terrorist Act. But why are they even allowed back? So let's not forget that Sir Keir Starmer, good friends with Anthony Albanese. Anthony Albanese has had it's recorded the pictures of him on pro-Palestinian marches. Let's just remember Keir Starmer, a man that recognizes, a Palestinian state, which doesn't exist. And then you and I would sit here through history and say, it's Jordan, right? Transjordan, Jordan. People have a problem with history. So we then have him doing that. We've got to remember their relationships with Lula of Brazil, with Justin Trudeau, who stood down, and then, of course, Mark Carney. Remember all the relationships there. People have got to wake up to this, to the principality and the power that is moving, which is cultural Marxism, which is all the attacks on all our civic institutions at home. It's a long subject. Nathan, I do apologise.
No.
Take a load of minutes.
You've no need to apologise, but I think you're right. It's when we've had from the river to the sea for the last few years going through our cities, towns, when we've got at those events, you've also got events where Muslims are enacting with walking sticks, taking hostages and doing things on the streets. These clips are on YouTube, and they're not fake, they're real. You can see them. And we expect that people won't act out and they won't do anything. When we've got in Islam, in Muslim countries where they're teaching their children how to kill Jews and take them to the neck with a knife, and they do this in churches. They do Christmas nativities and they do plays which are talking about how to benefit people. In the Muslim schools for children, they're teaching them how to kill Jews and Christians, and that can be evidenced. That's documented. We have radical preachers in the UK preaching in mosques the hatred and how to attack and maim and do awful things to Christians and Jews. So we can't expect nothing to happen. But the other thing we've got to understand is that the church needs to wake up, because first go for the Saturday people and then for the Sunday people. It's coming to us. And they need to wake up.
And on that level, I would recommend that every person, and I hope to interview him, looks up Raymond Ibrahim's work, get hold of his books, follow what he has been talking about, and that we have to address the ideology of Islam, which is not a people group, political ideology, and the way it's portrayed, and to go through history, look at the gates of Vienna, to the Battle of Tours, go through this, go through the Barbary pirates, look at all this, look at what's happened since 635 AD. So look at the countries that we talk about, the Coptic Christians at one point, Egypt, a very Christian country, then to look at Iraq and elsewhere, to understand what the East means, what the West means, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and the Eastern Orthodox Church is another interesting and important discussion to have. But this is where we're at, to stick to history, to stick to facts, to realize that history that has been portrayed to us is not necessarily the history that we think it should be. We have to be courageous to re-examine all of that, which it does take courage. And hear me, I'm not calling myself an expert on a lot of this, but try and pay attention to the best of my ability in between all the different things that we're doing. And it's really important that we recommend other people that do outstanding work on this. And Raymond Ibrahim is one of those. Yes. As a real scholar, I mean, he's absolutely superb. And of course, there are others, Bill Warner, others of, I think it's Bill Federer. Then you look at dear Robert Spencer, and also Jamie Glazoff of the Glazoff gang. I'm not saying Jamie because I've just been on his show, which I have. But people that have been talking about these issues for so long, who are scholars and extremely informed. And then, of course, people like Bridget Gabriel as why, and also Gad Saad. It isn't about name checking for clicks or for the sake of it. We want to encourage the body. Yes. Hosea 4 verse 6 says, "My people are destroyed through lack of knowledge," and we need to encourage them to gain that knowledge and to realize that, as I say, the way things are being pushed to us within the historical framework, we have to re-examine, and we have to re-examine that very quickly to understand things, and also to understand why so many young people, and before you and I get accused of being, old, that it comes life experience that we have when they're on the street and they don't know the facts. You and I have seen videos of people when people go up to them and say, "Could you please name what river with what sea?" and they can't. Yes. They can't do that. They don't know. They don't even know where it is, and they just say, "Well, we're just out here protesting." What? Because they're young and there's some student that goes to some university studying a course of irrelevance. But this is where we've got to the point. And I think I'm seeing that where I'm sitting presently at the moment talking to you. We have got so much to the point, and I'm saying it as an ex-teacher, of the indoctrination, Nathan. There is no other word for it.
I think what's alarming is the church leaders, those who are called to shepherd the sheep, the believers who attend, don't want to talk about things like this. What they want is ecumenical meetings, interfaith meetings, and my answer is often, okay, there's one recording of an interfaith gathering in the Bible. It went very, very badly for the people of interfaith. That's where Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and so that's what happened. I'm not calling for people to do that, but what I'm saying is that's how serious God takes it. We cannot pray with people from other faiths and say, "Hey, we're worshiping the same God." We can't allow Muslims into a church to take meetings. But sadly, the church, because it's so removed from the true faith and biblical precepts, that it allows all this now. And so we have shepherds shepherding the flocks who were shepherding them then to death. And the Bible talks about in these times, woe to the shepherds. And so for any pastor, teacher listening to this, I don't say this lightly, but what are you doing at this moment to prepare your people, the people of God? God is giving you sheep to look after. And what are you doing to prepare them for the famine, for the pestilence, for the war which is coming? Are you equipping them with spiritual resilience, faith in God? Are you equipping them with knowledge on how to meander through these days and the emotional security? Or are you just saying, oh no, it'll all be fine? Well, sadly, the Bible talks that it won't be fine. And it says in Scripture, those who see danger coming should prepare. A wise man does that.
Well, if it's been, as it's been pointed out by, I'll say it, by Jan Markell over here, for argument's sake, in the very recent times, was to turn around and say, in a discussion with someone else, turning around and going, well, if people in America are not going to teach a third of the Bible, you can check me out on this in regard to the percentage, talking about biblical prophecy. They're not going to teach that, then we've got a problem. We also have that problem at home. This is not. We'll also caveat this and say this is not for entertainment purposes, right? This is to equip people for what is coming, and we need to be shouting and screaming about that. And as I think it's Ezekiel 33, where it talks about that if we're not hear me, people, we're not calling ourselves anyone special. We're not. But the fact is we have a responsibility to speak the truth. And if we are not standing on the walls, sounding the alarm, which we've been asked to do, and giving the warning, then the blood is on us. But if we sound the alarm and people don't listen, then the blood is on them. You have heard me and Nathan say this a number of times over the last few months. And, we look back at the COVID-Novid debacle of awfulness, and we look at all the fallout from there. We were shouting. You've written an amazing book about that, unlocking Bible prophecy, and all the things that are in there where you're trying to sound the alarm, and we've just got people that don't believe us. Okay, fine. Then go and read what the book of Revelation said. Go and read it, right? Just read it and see what's unfolding. And me, of all people, it's not easy to say that there is no political solution to a spiritual problem. And this is where we are at. And Nathan, I'm finding yet again there are far more non-Christians, far more people that don't know Jesus yet as their personal Lord and Savior, who are awake and to events that are going on and are really questioning that. They are in many ways desperate. They really I won't name them, but I'll give a wonderful example, having had the privilege to interview them, but people can work that out. But the key thing is when people are pointing to the Christian traditions of our own country, and they're pointing to that, and they're wanting them, I would like you to talk about that. They're addressing the old bones of our country, right? The traditions that where people think faith has come from. When they're addressing that, when they are then seeking to get people to sing some of the old hymns that have got incredible words from our own country, and they may not call themselves a Christian yet, but they know that there is a fight going on between good and evil. And I am particularly in regard to the whole transgender issue and the demotion of of women and women's spaces and all of this, and we may discuss that a little bit.
Well, let's discuss that. Let's just go on to that, Mark. So, I mean, that's. Let's discuss why you're in America and just unpack that for a moment, and then let's give us your thoughts on how America is seeing the UK at the moment.
Yeah. Well, bless you. I'm over here producing a documentary. I just set it on the transgender issue and all of the fallout of that. I'm, in one sense, quite understandably, I'm a bit late to this game. There are other people that have been doing so much work on this, incredible work on this, from, here's the clue, from incredible people like Kelly J. Keane to also amazing people that sadly, have stood in the gap shouting and screaming, and there's been a huge cost for them, like Graham Linehan being another, and many others. But then I want to mention this, having I have interviewed her, and then there's mutual friends that know her. Then you've got people like Erin Lee, who are based in Colorado. She 2020, her daughter, she sent her daughter to an art club, an after-school club. It was a after-school club using art as a transgender indoctrination camp. The documentary can be found online, called Art Club. So a dear friend of mine, I have interviewed her on my channel, which is Melanie Kreitz-Packard, is a surgeon friend of mine whose specialism is urology. That's her specialism, and she has been helping and speaking out in regard to the public space, in regard to when people wish to detransition, and speaking out against transgender. And I am on this, I'll admit, I'm on this fast track learning curve where we've been looking the whole discussion of Kinsey, the Kinsey Institute, the infamous books that he created on male behavior, female behavior, then the infamous person Money, who comes from New Zealand actually, who then there were two boys, and one of them had a circumcision that went wrong. Then that boy basically brought up as a girl. I won't go into details, but you can imagine what you then do with certain operations. And both these boys, they were, I think, twins, very sadly committed suicide. And realizing all the mental health fallout of all of this. So there's a number of interviews that have been undertaken. There's more to go, and then more. But the fact that the Bible says, we are made male and female, and we're made in God's image. And as Psalm 139 talks about, I put every single hair on your head, and that sex is defined at conception. Defined as conception. I won't go into the biology of various things. In some ways, I don't feel qualified to do that, but on others, yes. But this is what we're looking at. But we're looking at the whole thing of indoctrination, and then you end up coming across cultural Marxism. You end up going to the Frankfurt School. You are looking at the sexual revolution of the 60s, and we all must. So these are all the things that we're really in time trying to bring to the table. And one of the privileges of doing this is who you meet, who you then are asked to try and put in front of the camera and have a discussion. And there are many, many people that have detransitioned, that went through a transgender operation, transitioning into that, and then they're detransitioning to that. So there's going to be a number of interesting conversations to have, which I believe and I hope are helpful and also powerful. But as the Bible says, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but we're fighting against principalities and powers. I don't take any of this lightly, and then it's understanding that this is a business. This is a business. And it's lucrative for some. I will make this statement here. We've already talked about it. With this surgery, when people think it's perfectly acceptable, I'm sorry to say it like this, and I will say it for effect deliberately because people have to be pulled up. When it seems acceptable to chop people's bits off, then I'm sorry, I've got huge problems with this. When it's acceptable to then make sure that they're on transitioning drugs for a number of years, what is that doing to people's minds and young people making decisions? So the link between what's happening in the modern day and what Mengele undertook in Auschwitz and other camps, oversaw things, and the experimentations, especially with twins, there is a huge link. This whole way corporations happened, the whole ideology within the Nazi framework has not gone away, Nathan. And I'm not, it's in many ways it's an uncomfortable realization. It's an uncomfortable discussion to have. But when we look at the COVID nonsense and people think that it's perfectly acceptable to, we're going to force injections, etc., into people. If you don't have this, you can't continue to be employed. And that the whole thing of the Nuremberg trials, protecting people from those kind of actions, and how that we seem to have forgotten them then at that point. And other people greater than me have explained all that and spoken out against that. But this is the reality of where we are in. What does do no harm mean in regard to taking as a doctor, nurse, etc., taking your oath? It means exactly that. Do no harm to your patients. But if you think it's perfectly acceptable to then be paid to push the big pharma ideology, then I think, with great respect, you really, really need to take the time out and really examine yourself. I'll just quickly say this in regard to that as well, Nathan. One of the thoughts that I am definitely having on this is, where is the morality? Where are doctors who are saying, no, this is wrong? Where are medical health practitioners saying this is wrong? Well, I'm talking to them. We will interview them, because this is so important. And then we wonder why young people are so confused. And then it's about language, because that then leads to the whole thing of mind control and wanting to break people's morality, their thoughts down. And it is about language, because it's all to do with that. So that's what I'm doing here. I won't go into any other details except to say it's been quite an eye-opener at times. And it's also been a real privilege to meet people, to be used to connect people as well. That is a real privilege. This is not a hobby. This is people's lives that we're talking about. This is the spiritual battle that we are under. And I don't have to tell you how we are, you and I are personally censored in the United Kingdom, which is fast becoming a very disunited kingdom, or it's particularly there. So that's what's going on. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for asking me that.
Thank you. I would just say to people, like you've mentioned, this is a spiritual battle, and I would encourage people to remember you in their prayers, to pray for God's protection for you, and that God will open up doors and continue to use you in that matter, because we are engaging in a spiritual battle, and that battle takes its toll at times.
Yeah.
But that in relation then to how people, because you're in the US, how are they seeing things in relation to the UK? The UK's just had local elections, haven't they? And that has just gone. It's not gone well for the government of the day.
No, not at all. It seems that the Reform Party, led by Nigel Farage, still with facts, seems to have done extremely well in vast areas of the United Kingdom, made huge gains in council seats, whether that's on behalf of by Labour, by Conservative within the two-party system. So congratulations to them on that, and all the people that work hard to do that. Some of them I know. Okay, that's good. There was a lot of stuff we could unpack there. We could unpack the relationship that Rupert Lowe, when he was a member of Reform, we could unpack all that and what's happened there. There's a lot to say there, but we'll maybe leave that for another day, because when you're over here, the news cycle respectfully stays within the borders of America, but of course is looking at what has been happening in Iran, and there is lots of Trump derangement syndrome, but there's also that people need to, in the UK, need to have their eyes open and pay very close attention to people like Peter Thiel, Palantir, etc. Again, they are uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable conversations, even here in various parts of America. And remember that, you know, all the American states, whether when you go west, very different to east. When you go south, and then you look at north, very different, defined by weather. You and I have a dear friend in North Dakota. It's very, very different to the south, where I'm presently in. So, yeah, they are concerned. I know I've had that from one or two friends. They're very concerned. I'll say this, over the last year, when friends of mine have said, well, the UK has had it. I have to say to you that that's not very nice to hear. It's not very pleasant to hear, because sometimes it could be a view through a lens of, well, the UK's had it, but I'm sure they don't mean it, but we're okay, and we've got a vast ocean between us, but we're okay. And I'll say it. And also, we have free speech and we have our guns. Well, I'm glad you have free speech in America. I'm also very glad that you have guns. And before anyone sends Exocet missiles to us over that, then they need to do their history and understand why America has guns and has the legality to do that. And also, when they go on about school shootings, they need to give me examples of certain ones, and then to look at why those shootings were undertaken. And if young people go in there and think it's perfectly acceptable to kill other students, we then need to examine their mental health and why we have this. The other thing is, if you tidied up Chicago, for argument's sake, then when America is on a list in regard to the amount of people killed, in regard to guns, if you've got Chicago, other cities that are not enforcing the gun laws properly, then they'd understand why they are so far down the list. If they were enforced properly, then America, I think, will be in the top 4 of less in regard to people that are actually shot in regard to gun crime. So, of course, then you've got Democratic states, you've got Republican states, different viewpoints should be in regard to politically, I say should be, but of course we have rhinos in name only. But they are looking at our country with deep concern, and that upsets them. They cannot, you know as well as I do, on Twitter feeds, there's some fantastic reporting on there. They don't understand why we have all these illegal immigrants coming over on boats. They don't understand that. They can't, why isn't that not being stopped? And as I've explained, Nathan, when I've explained to friends, we have voted and we have voted and we have voted and we have voted for that to not stop, for that to stop. When you educate people and say, we don't have time to talk about Margaret Thatcher and go into certain things in regard to certain aspects, because it's not all roses in regard to her tenure at all. But she was a darn sight more conservative than anyone that we have had since then. but we also are fully aware of the shenanigans that were going on, and even the beginning of the shenanigans on the attack on what was then taught in schools. That's a subject for another day. But we have not had since her any idea, anyone who would say is a conservative, true conservative. It's interesting to talk to Americans about that, but they are deeply concerned about Islam. And of course, and I'm deliberately addressing Islam. Islam is not a people group, it's a political ideology. And that is what has to be spoken about. We've got other amazing people like David Woods who and others who talk about that, including Jay Smith, where Jay was back in England for many years and talking at Hyde Park Corner on a regular basis. So with all the other people we mentioned, they are watching that. But my also concern is, and I say this with much love, is that I'm concerned about how much people are asleep over here. And the issue is, Nathan, just because you have a president of the United States, for argument's sake, before again more Exocet missiles come in, let's just say this, in their system, just because the president of the United States is there pushing back against all the transgender ideology that is pushed into schools elsewhere, this all has to be dealt with on the state level, on individual states. That's where the fight is. And you only have to ask people like Aaron Lee of our club or what's been happening in Colorado. And the fact that they are trying to take parental rights away on speed across this nation. That's what they're trying to do. So also this nation has a huge history of homeschooling. My dear friend Alex Newman has, regularly over the last 6 years going around talking about that, other people talking about that. Well, you and I both know that homeschooling at home is under attack. The government, the last thing they want them to do is homeschool, because schools are seen as an indoctrination camp. There's one tweet I saw today where a young teacher is standing out in front of her class going, "I'm non-binary, here are my pronouns, whatever, they, whatever."
The model we have in schools nowadays was taken from the German Nazi model. So it's that indoctrination.
And you're absolutely right. And what is, at times we haven't, I'm looking at a load of books around me here. We just don't get time to read this or to look at this information, even the books behind you. But I know the books I've got at home. But we've got to learn this and realize, and we know where we come from. But as someone close to me would immediately say, "Hold on, Mark, it's in Scripture, it's in the Bible," and we encourage people to get back to that. So answering the question, they're looking at Europe. They can't believe at times what's gone on, and of course the whole situation with Iran. We have enough replacement theology at home. There is a lot of replacement theology over here, and we know that. We go back to the late 1800s and what was then being taught in Germany, and basically a critical thinking that was outside the Bible. The Bible wasn't included, taking their theology to such a level that the Bible wasn't included in that. And then we look at what happened within the First World War and then unfolding within the Nazi ideology. And I just ask people to go and look at that, and they would also be educated in thinking, where does certain technology come from, Nathan? Also within that whole thing and the spiritual battle defined. And people get very bored with you and I when we end up saying, well, in the modern day, we end up going back to the Nazis and what they believed in, right? In the modern day. So they're looking at this, and and I think in Iran, yes, within the press, within the Washington DC Soup Bowl, there are criticisms of the president of the administration in regard to why have you undertaken this military action? And you could argue, especially as the midterms, I believe in October, November this year, that would not look good for President Trump at all. It's a huge political risk. But if you take it on face value, even though there is no doubt about it, biblical prophecy, God's hand behind this, because if you want to lead to a one world government system, the country that stands in the way is the country where I am staying right now, with its constitution. I'm not going to get into clever ass people. Yes, I did say that. The chairman said, well, the constitution doesn't exist, it's already been suspended. Yeah, I would, in regard to the J6 prisoners, when they have had certain court cases in Washington, D.C., and they walk in and they're immediately told, well, the Constitution in regard to your rights has been suspended. I'd agree, and I would agree elsewhere. But just finally, again, my concern is, particularly in young people, when they seem to think it's perfectly acceptable to burn the American flag in a country where they have no idea how well off they have it and how good it is for them. The fact that they could even express themselves like that is extremely sad. But unfortunately, they do not know the recent ideology that's actually attacking the fundamentals of this country. You and I don't have time to go from 1945 right up to today, discuss Vietnam, go through the shooting of JFK, and also well before that in regard from McKinley just after 1900, so leading to Ted Roosevelt. Why am I saying that? Is because when people call you and I conspiracy theorists, we're not. We're actually, in the end, we're conspiracy. We want the truth, and unfortunately, everything that we've explained and we're trying to talk about is the truth. It has happened. In fact, you and I are running out of what we call conspiracies because they've all come about. So just finally, they are deeply concerned what they are seeing happening in the mother country. And when they say it's been the history of democracy spreading parliament around the world, well, the Fabian Society was created 1865, and you and I are looking at democracy and all of that in a very, 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 very different light. And I'll end it with this. I've said this. I at times feel I stand in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's quite a painful place to be. You get buffeted from one side and then you get buffeted from the other side. And you're looking at America, you're looking at the UK, and there's like a veil. And what happens is you go through this veil when you come to the US, and you come across certain history, you come across, different algorithms, different things that come into feeds, and you think, yep, that affirms that. You go back the other way, and a load of that is then, of course, design works the other way, where you don't see things. One of the biggest issues, I think, is, of course, the medical field here, the medical industrial complex, how they pay for their healthcare, how that healthcare is then practiced, the fact that healthcare it's about, bluntly, in many cases, it's about making money. And that's why the whole transgender thing, push, it making a lot of people a heck of a lot of money. Some of that maybe we're, God willing, being revealed in our documentary. So I've said a lot, Nathan, which is a real thank you, my friend. I appreciate that.
No, I think it's crucial at this time to really give people an overview of what's happening, and to also put it into biblical context. And like you said, there is a veil between the two nations, because when you go to other countries, it does open up algorithms which allows you to see things on the internet which you wouldn't see in your own country. And for people in the UK, they might think, well, it's not censored in the UK. Really? Just look at what's happened recently in relation to the UK and the digital facial recognition. The country which has the most is China. We're the next country, which has cameras, and now we're going to have facial recognition everywhere. The digital infrastructure for the Antichrist is being rolled out, and that should really wake people up to see the lateness of the hour. You mentioned earlier about the pre-trib rapture. Well, as we both agree, we don't follow that doctrine. For me, I think it's a doctrine of demons. I think it's leading the church down so they don't prepare, and it's really, it shows a lack of biblical discernment, really. And I won't go on a rabbit, get on my soapbox, because for me, the fact that it puts people into a false sense of security because they think they won't be here, when the Bible clearly says that they will. In fact, in Revelation 12, it says it's the Jewish people who aren't here when they flee Jerusalem and go to a place of safety. It then says that those who keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus remain. The jumps and the twists and the, I don't know, acrobats of theology they've got to do to come up to their thinking is quite immense. But
I want to say it, I completely concur with you. And I'm just going to say something else that's going to upset a few people. When people keep going on about that subject, let's just say it publicly. The issue is it a ministry or is it a business, right? By keep going on about that subject, does it mean that they're selling more and more DVDs? Now, there are some people, if I'm fortunate enough, that may actually listen to what I've just said, and they'll just turn it off and go, well, you're just upset you haven't got 3 million people watching your show. No, we have to say the uncomfortable thing. And also, as a dear friend of mine over here, who shall be named nameless, turns around and says, if I got a dime or a dollar for every single time someone says, well, things are unfolding, I can't believe I'm still here, they'd be a millionaire, right? It'd be really good if they were a millionaire, because then we could use some of that financing to actually continue to speak the truth about a number of matters. So we've just lost loads of friends, whatever, but maybe they weren't friends in the first place. But this is what we have to ask. There are huge ministries that people are aware of, without naming names, who was, without other people then dying recently. The fact that, which is very sad, but this is the truth. What are those ministries, inverted commas, about? What are they about? In the end, you have to argue that it's about a business. But also for a number of people, it's not. They are struggling to get the word out there on a shoestring of absolutely nothing. But Nathan, these things have to be said along with our cultures, but our culture is very, very different to America, right? It is very different. I love my country, but I love this country. But it's very different. We may think we speak the same language.
Yeah.
They don't spell centre properly. Maybe the pronunciation of aluminium at times is not quite right. Then they have the World Series and they're the only country in it. I'm saying that partly humour, because I also have dear friends over here who have lovingly said that, and it's called most of the time raucous laughter, but to actually get people to think. But it isn't about saying certain things to then be offensive. It's trying to wake people up. And the problem is, if people turn around and say, well, I don't want to say those things because it means I'm not going to have the opportunity to speak in certain environments. Okay, fine. I can understand that if they can get the word out. But also, on the other hand, I think we really, really do need to speak the truth. And there are no doubt about it, because I know who they are. There are platforms over here that would not have you on because you don't believe in a pre-trib rapture. We've gone there. I've just said it.
Well, maybe it's because they can't argue their case against biblical truth. And they must be thinking, though, and this is a thought we'll leave with the people. is the Bible talks about, and those who know me, this is part of the premise of the book, is we had COVID, and the first seal is about people being enslaved, and it continues. It gets seven times, increases sevenfold throughout the whole of the tribulation period and prior to the Great Tribulation when they start opening. But people say, oh, it's got to happen during the final tribulation. Well, why is it? The first seal brings enslavement, the second takes peace from the earth, the third brings a great famine globally and an economic collapse, and the fourth brings war, and the fifth brings martyrdom. Well, wait a minute, we've had enslavement, and enslavement seems to be getting worse because the digital system is really putting a digital panopticon, a prison around people, just like the Chinese social credit system. There's no peace in the earth anymore. It's been taking out the earth for a while, but it's going to intensify to such an extent. The cost of living crisis in the UK is going global, and there's going to be a famine. In fact, they're talking about within 4 to 8 weeks, we're going to have serious issues around the world because of the fallout of Iran, that we could see food prices skyrocket. There's also no bees around in the UK. Bees are being depopulated and the colonies have been destroyed, which will have an impact on crops. And I say that also because the lack of crops because of fertilizers is going to be hit this year. So you're going to have a decrease in crops, you're going to have a decrease in harvest, which is going to be exacerbated by the lack of fertilizers. Not that you need them, but we've been forced to use them because of how we farm nowadays. So if we just look at that, and then the fact that global war's coming, wait a minute, if that's not a roadmap, what the Bible talks about, then prior to the time of the Great Tribulation, then I don't know where we are. So people really need to put away their theological thinking and just open up the Bible and think, well, that could be where we are. Because if we say, okay, no, it's going to be another 30 years down the line or 20 years down the line, the infrastructure of the beast, the digital enslavement, if we just leave it another 10 years, we'll be totally enslaved and it'll be a brave new world. And the fact is, if we leave it for another generation with transhumanism, we won't be human anymore.
No.
Because of the genetic manipulation. So if we just take it on that basis, we're later on the prophetic clock than what we get. And I just say to people, don't take whatever we say or anybody else says, read your Bible and use that as your primary source. Because the battle is that the enemy wants to blind you. He doesn't want you to know what's happening. So final minute, Mark, what's your final encouragement to people? And then we'll close and wrap it up.
My final encouragement is Jesus is returning. We're not date setters, right?
Amen.
The Bible makes that very clear. And I'll say this, if you do not know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, then forget about anything else that we've said and just remember that and go and sort that out, right?
Amen.
Now. And if you want to ask us questions, put a question in the chat. If there's a way of contacting you in that regard, if you need help, then ask. But that's the number one thing, Nathan. That is what I would say. And to say, I'd appreciate your prayers. Nathan would appreciate your prayers, and also to pray for our nation. May is a very occultic time, right? It's a very occultic time. Look at the 1st of May, others. So people need to be praying and remembering that. So that's my final thought, mate.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's good to chat, and we'll have to do some more soon. So let me just play us out. Amen.